welcome to today's episode of the Balanced Approach podcast. I'm your host, Louis Padian. I hope that you're doing well and are enjoying the podcast and the topics we've covered so far. These podcasts are released every Monday, Wednesday and Friday, so be sure to subscribe wherever you are listening to be kept up to date. So today we'll be finishing up the short carbohydrate mini-series. There'll be episodes in the future, I'm sure, around specific topics or myth busting around carbohydrates. But for now, I just want to give you an overview and almost remove that fear and keep stuff to what's relevant right now during this mini-series. So far we've covered what carbs actually are, what they do, are they essential or not, and carbs and weight gain and weight loss had its own episode going into depth around why we see weight fluctuations and also some of the myths around that carbs cause weight gain, that they cause obesity and all these things. So hopefully you enjoyed those episodes. So for today, actually, I thought it was really important, as I've probably alluded to it, but to specify really what my advice is around how many carbs you actually need. And the reason that I haven't given such a specific answer like I have with protein in the past, and I will do with fats in the future, is because, in my opinion, it's down to preference and what you're trying to achieve and what your dietary needs, which I know is a bit of a cop-out answer. The reason I say this is that there's people who live on very high carbohydrate diets, people who live on very low carbohydrate diets. There's people who vary their carbohydrate intake day to day. Most of us will. So there's no real hard or fast guidelines or specific numbers. There are some sort of guidelines that I would sort of give you, which would be to include more whole grains where possible and more complex carbohydrates into your diet instead of what we'd call traditional simple carbs, such as sugar or stuff with added sugar or sweets and things. The only exception to that would be sort of when we're looking at whole foods, looking at fruits, adding those in, stuff that's going to be high in fiber, high in nutrients, high in volume, but low in calories. It's fantastic. Try and include those as much as we can, as there's lots of benefits to health. Another thing that I'd probably advise would be to limit the amount of processed foods and try to include more of the unprocessed or whole foods in there. The reason I say this is that processed foods are easier to overeat on. They're less filling and potentially less nutritious. The key thing around that is, though, I did not say do not eat them, as they can definitely take place in a healthy diet, but it has to be in moderation, which again is another sort of cop-out description of how much we should eat. So the reason that I don't give a number on this in particular is because when we're sort of setting someone's calories or diet, or we're looking at weight loss, carbs potentially are very low on my list of what sort of guidance is. So we'd work usually by setting someone's calories, working out how much protein they need, setting guidelines with fats, and then with the remainder of the calories that are left, that's what we'd probably do. But when we dive into the sort of fat loss pyramid of what's most important, fats and carbohydrates come sort of third or fourth on that list behind calories and protein. So that's why I don't have a specific number. Again, you can achieve really good results. There are some really interesting caveats around that. First of all would be performance based. So if you're looking to do a performance sport or team sport or things like that, or training in the gym, there'd be some guidance around carbohydrates that we'll cover a bit more in depth in the future. Secondly, there's also some individual circumstances around conditions like polycystic ovarian syndrome, type 2 diabetes and epilepsy. And I'm speaking more about polycystic ovarian syndrome and type 2 diabetes. In my opinion, those people that I can work with. Epilepsy is more clinical, more under dietitian. But there's been some interesting research or potential benefits of moderating or reducing carbohydrate intake within those sort of populations. Lastly, on this topic, before we get into the sort of good stuff, would be around fiber, trying to get more fiber into your diet from whole foods. But that's something that we're going to give a bit more detail on moving forward. The main sort of takeaway I wanted to discuss with you today is where is best to get your carbohydrate sources. So I want to give you some examples, like I did in the protein episode, around what sort of things you could include to benefit your health, benefit sort of potentially your weight loss goals, or stuff around performance. So my key sort of takeaways or advice around this is potentially the most important thing is find carbohydrates that you enjoy, that you feel good, that you enjoy eating, but also don't sit too heavy, don't cause any irritation with digestion. And with that, often one of the things I work with a lot on patients and clients is exploring new and exciting ways to have different types of carbohydrates in your diet, particularly fruits and vegetables. Often people have got poor experience with certain foods, and that might have happened when they were younger. They might have had it in a certain way, for example, just plain boiled veg, and then they've got the impression that they don't like broccoli, carrots, or anything like that, when actually there's some really nice, flavourful ways to have it. And what I'd do to encourage you to try foods that potentially that you feel like you haven't had in a very long time, or potentially only had when you were younger, and try pairing them with different foods, try different seasonings with them, or different cooking methods, as this can really enhance the flavour and enjoyment of those foods and add a lot more versatility and diversity to your diet. As I said, with that, ones that you enjoy, but predominantly whole and less processed options compared to more processed foods. So within the carbohydrates, these are the sort of ones that would be a common feature that we've sort of put into groups, where we look at fruits, whole grains, legumes, and starchy carbohydrates. And that's when we're sort of looking at potatoes, butternut squash, and things. So what we're going to do is going to quickly go through each meal, potentially some options that you can consider, and then hopefully that'll give you an idea of how to look at these sort of within a balanced meal or a balanced diet to try different options. So when we're looking at breakfast, fruit is a great option here. It's one of the options alongside snacking that fruit often commonly appears in, and something like sort of having a yogurt based or maybe some cereal, having some fruit that you enjoy, drizzle of honey, and that's sort of quite a nutritious meal, maybe topping with some chopped nuts. If we're looking at potentially some whole grains that you could have in there, a common one that I enjoy is sort of oats. Really simple, really diverse, really flavorful, filling, quite low in calories, and having some oats, throwing some berries in there again, adding some potentially some nuts or nut butter to add a little bit more fat, or maybe even some whey. That's commonly what I do to sort of have that balance to that meal. And then another one that people often or might not consider a more savoury option would be something like a legume. So lentils, chickpeas, and beans. Making a lentil and chickpea vegetable scramble eggs, that can add a bit more fat and protein in there with the eggs, and or even chucking in some avocado as well. And again, adds a bit more diversity, but a huge amount of fibre and nutrition to it. One of the key things I would say, that the links in the description below for my 5-day recipe and meal plan, that's completely free for you to download, and there's an amazing recipe for some Moroccan eggs that definitely can really hit all the right notes for you with regards to protein, legumes in there, lots of fibre, and really making it nice and filling but nutritious and quite low calorie breakfast. So definitely worth checking that out. When we're looking at lunch or potentially dinner, sweet corn is technically a fruit, but it's more like a grain. So again, common tuna, mayo, sweet corn, even adding some pasta in there. That's quite a complete meal, quite filling, quite diverse, lots of different textures, flavours and tastes, and can be really nutritious as well. So that's something that if you've got a carbohydrate in there like a sweet corn, can really add a bit more diversity to that meal, and sort of especially a lot more texture as well. When we're looking at whole grains, having a look at the common one with rice, but maybe swapping with some quinoa, different types of rice when we're looking for potentially a red rice or a brown rice, and having that with protein source, maybe adding a bit of a drizzle of some oil in there with some vegetables. Really diverse meal there, but swapping in those different carbohydrate sources from the grains can be a really good option as well. Another one that obviously features at breakfast as well is sort of beans or black beans. And again, another one that is in the recipe book is that black bean and corn quesadillas. Really diverse again, black beans, corns, whole grain wraps. Really, really nutritious, lots of fibre in there, lots of different nutrients and textures and tastes, making it super tasty, something that you could take into work, cook the night before. Really diverse, and potentially chucking some protein sauce in there around chicken to really get more protein in there, make it a bit more filling as well. A common one that as we are moving into winter months, especially in the UK, would be soups. Really, really diverse sort of range of soups that you can have in there, but butternut squash could be a really good one. Again, if you're having some bread with it, potentially having a whole grain with some seeds in there, different textures and a bit more crunch and a bit more bite to it. And then if you want, if it's a chicken one, potentially putting some more chicken in there. Again, that lots of different options, and these are things that I'm just picking out the air that can be really useful. When we're looking into the evening meal, looking at rice again, potentially is a really good one, or whole grain pasta, whole grain breads. Mix and matching different ones that you can have in there. So potentially having a rice with a stir fried, if you want to reduce your meat intake, potentially tofu, some vegetables, and having a little bit of drizzle of oil in there as well. So not being afraid of oil, which we'll cover a lot more in when we move into the fats mini series coming up in the next couple of weeks. But that can add a lot more diversity to the meal as well. But trying different carbohydrates, different grain options, and seeing which ones you prefer. Different types of white rice. There's so many different types that you can have, and seeing which ones you prefer for which meals as well. Again, when we're looking at the carbohydrate sources for legumes at dinner time, one of the great recipes that's in the recipe book is the butter bean and chorizo stew. Got tomato in there, got chorizo, pesto, and some butter beans in there as well. Again, something a bit different, something more flavourful, a bit more spice to it, a bit more kick. But again, adding a bit more diversity, the amount of carbohydrates we're having in there as well. Then if we're looking at snacks in the evening, we've got things, this is where fruits can sort of reappear again, or are more likely to reappear. We've got things like strawberries, dipping them in, or having them within the French toast roll-ups, which again in the recipe book, we're looking at potentially having fruits and vegetables like carrots and cucumbers that we can cut into sticks and dip into stuff like guacamole, or have other dips with them alongside a protein source. And looking for potentially more whole grain options, and we're looking for rice crackers. And one of my favorites that I really like is a bit different, and I'd recommend you to try, is the black bean brownie recipe from the recipe book. Really interesting, but high in fiber. Can't really even taste the difference compared to a normal brownie. Really gooey, and it's a fantastic recipe to try out if you can. Lastly, which I potentially didn't cover on the protein episode, would be sort of drinks, because carbohydrates can often feature a lot more in drinks. And one of the biggest health benefits you can make is potentially being more aware or moderating the amount of calories that you're drinking. Not necessarily saying it's a bad thing, but being mindful of it. So if you're having a sugar sweetened beverage, something that we say is like a full sugar drink, like a regular Coke, regular Sprite, regular Fanta, that potentially is a lot more calories than we could have like an easy swap with a diet option. And another one is sort of like a fresh orange juice as well, which could be something to go to, but again, moderating that. Try not to have more than one sort of glass a day, and as it can be detrimental, or potentially detrimental to your goals long term, and sort of the health benefits start to reduce as we increase the amount of sort of sugar that we're having. A really good option for drinks that can feature throughout the day that I thought was definitely worth a mention, that can be really diverse, have a lot of fibre and sort of whole grains, fruits and grains in there, be smoothies. Making your own smoothies, putting a range of fruits in there, some vegetables potentially as well, some oats to really thicken it up, blend it up, have it throughout the day, add a bit of yogurt in there to a bit of protein, potentially some nut butters or a drizzle of olive oil or something just to add a bit more body to it. It could be a really great meal. So lots of options there. Definitely worth checking out the 5-day meal plan and recipe book that's in the bio below, because there's loads of different recipes, 20 different recipes, all with a meal plan as well, showing you how all those meals can feature within certain calorie limits and protein goals. But today we've sort of covered how many carbs I'd recommend, which there's lots of caveats to, and it's hard to put a definite number on, but definitely means that you shouldn't be cutting them all out, because you should be fearful of them. But definitely check out the recipe book attached below, and hopefully you've enjoyed this series, or this mini series on carbohydrates. So there you have it. Thank you very much for listening to today's episode of the Balanced Approach podcast. If you have any questions, queries, or would like to reach out to me, please do. I am at Louis Padian Nutrition, which is at LOUISPADIAN Nutrition on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and all other social media platforms. If you're looking for support in achieving your goals and living a healthier, happier, and more balanced life in the process, click the link below and inquire about working with me. Remember to subscribe to the Balanced Approach podcast wherever you're listening for more insightful episodes, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.